Well, you're right. It does look like every year that the rates increase, but this LTP delivers a very good news story about rates. For example, the first year is a 0.2% increase proposed, which is far less than inflation or CPI, and possibly one of the lowest around the place, I have to say. So that's good news, but that's an average. The second year is 0%. That's a really good score for ratepayers. But rates are always calculated on an average. So when individual ratepayers out there get their rates bill, they may find that they're less or more than that 0.2% for a variety of reasons.
And we're quite fortunate as a council that, unlike some others, we don't have any public debt. So the rates that we do collect are largely around capital works and our operations. So we're quite lucky in that respect, which is why we're able to keep our rate increases quite low. I think on a national scale, it's also quite important to understand that over the years, rate increases are actually quite low when you compare it to income tax increases or revenue generated by government. But why people get a bit grumpy about rates is that it's something that they're having to pay as opposed to something that's already taken out of their income. So that's why it generally gets a reaction.
I would like to draw the public's attention to one aspect of rates that is changing for this LTP. We have a number of charges. One of them is the uniform annual charge, which is a rate, a set amount of money per each ratepayer. So it's not based on capital value, it's just a set flat amount. And the Natural Heritage Fund, for example, is $5 plus GST, flat amount to every household. So we're proposing to increase the proportion that we take as a flat rate in the upcoming LTP. So from 15% of our overall rate take to 18%. So that means that the flat rate applied to ratepayers will be greater and the rate on capital value will be a little less. What this does, it does move the rates around a little bit, and so people on lower income properties may experience a slight increase because it's no longer on capital value. So the public need to look at that closely as to how it affects them in their community and talk to us about whether they support that approach, that rates movement.
Is that really fair, though, on lower income families and households?
Well, rating is always a pretty rough tool at the end of the day, and there are always swings and roundabouts. It does have an impact on the low income. It does save the people with higher capital value a bit of money. Having said that, it's generally struck around where someone gets the same value for the same service. So our navigational safety, for example, is a uniform annual charge because every household in the region gets exactly the same value from that work, whereas other work is generated by the user and therefore should be reflected on who pays. So yes, I guess the public have to look at those rates and say, well, is that the fair way of that portion being levied at us?
Yeah, and if I can just explain generally what proportion of rates make up our total revenue. So of our total revenue each year, just under 70% of our revenue comes from rates. The rest comes from user charges, income from central government for work that we do on their behalf and so on. So of that 70%, about half of that rates take is for people who get a particular service, a targeted service, like being within a flood control scheme or whatever, and the rest is some of the rates that Paul is talking about, what we call a general rate, of which some of it relates to property values and some of it relates to a uniform charge.